Okay, on to the hot read. Conference championships hot read. First impressions. Lines are out. We're looking at FanDuel right now. I'll give it to you real quick. Maybe we'll bite into the Super Bowl odds as well. If there's any edges there, it's really hard to tell. They're all really right there. So San Fran, Philadelphia, the first game a week from today, Sunday, January 29th, 3:00 start. Eagles 2.5-point favorites. There's juice on the Philly side. 45.5 is the total. That's moved slightly down from 46.5. And then Bengals Chiefs at 6:30. Kansas City 1.5-point favorite, as Jill alluded to earlier. And the total set at 47.5. We will start with the 3:00 matchup in San Fran and Philly. Brandon, what comes to mind here? Is there an edge now?
Yeah, a couple of things, just the things I've got my eye on here from Bet Labs. 1 seed favorites in the playoffs of 6 points or less, 9-5 against the spread. So that obviously is a trend right now for the Eagles and the Chiefs. It wouldn't shock me if we end up getting a road favorite by the time that these lines close in either, probably not both. I don't know if the Niners one's going to move quite that much, but of note, of the 5 teams that did not cover, 4 of those 5 underdogs that covered won the game outright. So I think if you like an underdog, you probably just go ahead and take the money line on either one of these games. For me, I'm probably not going to be looking to run to the counter with my bets on either of these games early on, just because we've got big injuries this week. And when the lines are this tight and there's really not necessarily a huge edge to gain, unless if you want the Eagles, you got to just go grab it, because just in case the line hits the 3, you don't want to lose the key number there. But other than that, if you like the Niners, if you're looking at Bengals or Chiefs, I think you just kind of have to wait on some of these injury information. We didn't mention with the Niners, I do have my eye a little bit on Christian McCaffrey. He had kind of that heating pad wrap thing around his calf late in the game as the Niners are trying to close things out. They're running Elijah Mitchell, not Christian McCaffrey. So we'll see. We're big on running backs, don't matter. But Christian McCaffrey is not just a running back. And in particular, the Eagles defense is vulnerable to the run and particularly vulnerable to pass catching running backs. So right. I need to see how McCaffrey is going to be. I think that's a big swing factor. My pick for this game right now, and the one hot read I would put in, I like the under here. Under 45.5. Like you said, Brandon, we open already a point higher. I think that line may drop a little bit, and especially if there's any McCaffrey injury news. If that's a thing, the line maybe goes down a little bit. If there's any other complication for Jalen Hurts or for Lane Johnson, the only way this line moves, I think, is down. And I think points are going to be hard to come by. San Francisco, elite run defense. So that's going to make Philadelphia's offense have to work a little bit. And we saw today Brock Purdy face a real defense finally. And like you mentioned, Brandon, their offense kind of stalled. I think this is a low-scoring game. So for right now, I don't have a side yet, but I do like the under here. I think that's probably the one hot read pick I would make right now, under 45.5.
It's a great call on McCaffrey, and keep in mind the game was in Santa Clara. It's not like it was freezing cold out and he got hit and was numb. Okay, they're in Santa Clara, and they brought that up on the broadcast. Greg Olsen was giving some insight to Kevin Burkhardt on what was actually going on there with McCaffrey late in the game. And as a pass catcher, some tight windows over the middle. He was the binky for Mr. Purdy there down the stretch to move the chains and get those key first downs to milk clock and put that game away against Dallas. Jill, I know we don't have any anytime touchdown market posted yet, but any edges or any foreshadowing you could provide?
Well, the first guy I think you want to look at is on the Bengals, specifically Tyler Boyd, who lines up exclusively in the slot, and maybe even Hayden Hurst as well, because the Chiefs allowed the second most touchdowns in the slot this season. And part of the reasoning of why we took Christian Kirk was pretty much for that he lined up in the slot a lot. He was going to get a ton of targets, and that was their weak point. And what did he do? He scored the touchdown and was the leading receiver for the Jaguars. So that would probably be the first angle I'm looking at from a Chiefs standpoint. I have to see the way that the odds play out. Again, I also have to see if Patrick Mahomes is playing, because if it's Chad Henne who is playing, then I'm probably not going to be betting any Chiefs touchdown scores. But now, if just from a Eagles and Niners standpoint, just from a recency bias and memory, they did play. Most of the personnel is the same. It was week 2 of last season. Niners go in as 3-point favorites into the link and win 17-11. So the game would have went way under. It was closed at 44.5. So in that game, I'm not saying we're going to see a lot of the same thing, but that has been a little bit of the Eagles' weakness, even though the Giants were able to exploit it, is that they have been a little bit more vulnerable from a running standpoint of passes over the middle. Like the outside is pretty much a no-fly zone, so you're not probably going to see much opportunity for a guy like a Brandon Ayuk or maybe even a Jawan Jennings. So, George Kittle, I'd probably say is the guy you want to look at from a touchdown scorer perspective. From the Eagles standpoint, I think it's the Kenneth Gainwell game. And the reason being is I think they're going to have to use some of that pass catching back standpoint to be able to chip and block that pass defense, especially if you even go back to that game. Nick Bosa, he had 2 sacks in that game on Jalen Hurts. That is going to be an issue for them, especially if Lane Johnson shows any signs of injury that he has been showing. I mean, I'm not saying he was injured really at all in this past week, but he clearly looked compromised a little bit in some plays. So I think that defensive line could cause some pressure. I mean, even Jalen Hurts was able to score on this defense when they played last. So I can only imagine he'll be used quite heavily again in a do or die game.
Yeah, of course, no A.J. Brown at that point in time.
But no Christian McCaffrey either. So again, that's the key thing of why we have to kind of monitor that injury, because you're right. Both of those guys are key swing talent on this team of what you want to look at either for touchdown scores or even just as far as what the total will be.
And Jimmy Garoppolo didn't throw a pick in that game, was not sacked as the starting quarterback. I see here in the box score, he ran the ball 11 times.
And a touchdown in that game.
And a touchdown. Purdy's mobile, but he's not of any quarterback remaining. Well, Burrow's
they will run him, though. They ran him against Seattle. When they ran him against Seattle, we were all standing in the Action Network offices being like, what are you doing? Like, we were all just like Googling who the third string quarterback was on the Niners, because we were like, why would you risk this? So we've seen the Shanahan at the goal line. He will still tend to throw his rookie to the fire. Purdy
had 3 carries for 8 yards, which I do think he hit his rushing over in that game. I think it was hovering around 6-7 yards, the Dallas game. So, all right, you hinted at some picks there for Kansas City and Cincinnati. That is the late game. They put the AFC title game at 6:30. Brandon, an edge here. Again, I think it's baked in, the Mahomes injury, the fact that it's a Kansas City 1.5-point favorite.
Yeah, I think you have to wait on the injury news, because obviously we need to see, there's a chance that Mahomes doesn't play. We don't have news on it yet. It's early in the week. It would be obviously shocking if he doesn't at least give it a go and try to be out there. He certainly will want to play, of course, unless the team decides that, I think basically he plays and plays through injury unless the team feels like there's a risk that he could hurt himself more long-term. We obviously don't know that, so no need to speculate on it. But I think you have to wait on that and see how functional does he look. Yeah, I kind of looked in my roster matrix and I have all the positions ranked and everything. And I said, okay, well, what if we get like 75% Mahomes, or what if 50% Mahomes? And I kind of gave myself some shades of gray on Mahomes, and the Chiefs go from the number 1 offense to either 2nd or 5th or 10th, basically, like kind of depending on which version of Mahomes we get. Well, it turns out that matters, because Mahomes is really the great equalizer in this matchup. If you take Mahomes away, and not even taking him away, if you make Mahomes mortal, just slightly less Mahomesy, Joe Burrow is the other quarterback. If they don't have an advantage at quarterback, and I don't know if they do with whatever version of Mahomes we're going to get, and as good as Joe Burrow is, look at the rest of the roster. The Bengals run the ball better. They've got stud receivers. Kansas City is bottom 5 against wide receiver ones and has really not had an answer for Jamar Chase. The defense, clearly better for Cincinnati. Special teams has been better for Cincinnati this year. Mahomes is the big advantage, even against Burrow, because it's Mahomes and he can do anything. And if you don't have that advantage, I don't honestly even know if the Chiefs are the right favorite in this game. That's kind of my early instinct here. I need to dig into it a little more, so I'm not running to play this right now. All my life that I've known Pat Mahomes, if you said you could just take Pat Mahomes to just win a home game, that's it. Basically a coin flip home game. You need to say no more. But the pass protection for the Chiefs has not been great. We saw the Bengals D-line dominate today against the Bills, and that was a huge thing. We need to see, too, the Bengals, Jonah Williams and Kappa, either of them could be back for this game. That's another injury situation to keep an eye on. But for right now, I have to lean Bengals here. If you have a less than 100% Mahomes, which we have to assume we're getting at this point, less mobile, leaky pass protection, if you neutralize even 10 or 20% of the Mahomes God factor, that was the one thing that you have to like the Chiefs for, that and home field. So I feel like I'm leaning Bengals direction here. I may end up waiting and betting live. I think you get a home field advantage early. You probably get like a shot in Mahomes' ankle to neutralize some of the pain factor early. But we've talked all year about how strong the Bengals have been in the second half. They've covered, I believe, now 23 of 27 second halves. And they've closed out well in all the matchups against the Chiefs, which we're going to hear lots of all this week too. So it's a fun one. We've seen this matchup. If you don't get Mahomes 100%, I don't know how you can't kind of look toward the Bengals here.